A professional athlete who has to participate in training camp in August, or they won't have any chance of making the team, should tolerate more risk than a 14-year-old athlete who has a spring 7-on-7 league starting up. It actually makes sense for the professional athlete to try to come back at 6 months, if that's when training camp starts up, and if he doesn't make the team at this particular instance in his life, he probably won't ever have a chance to do it again.
Yeah, straight A student, but I'm friends with the cool kids. Following the rules and the rubric. Freestyle on the bus.
What's up? My name is Dr. Zach Geiser, and this is the GT Performance Podcast, where we have a conversation all about athlete development. If you're looking to develop speed, agility, strength, power, health, and character, you're in the right place. Before we start, I want to remind you that the information in these podcasts are for educational purposes only and should not be taken as a medical advice for you or your athlete. Consult directly with a healthcare professional. Today, we're taking a deep dive on returning to sport after ACL surgery. You tore your ACL. You've gone through 8 months of grueling rehab. You've missed out on 8 months of playing your favorite sport with your friends. You've gone through 8 months of isolation and FOMO. It sucks. You know what sucks worse? Re-tearing your ACL 6 months later. Around 25% of athletes who tear their ACL will re-tear that same ACL or tear the other ACL within 2 years of the initial surgery. That number is absurdly high. With 1 out of every 4 people re-tearing, clearly we're not doing something right. So what's the problem? Is it insufficient graft healing and or surgical error? Personally, I think this is usually the least likely culprit. It does not explain contralateral, which is other leg, tears at all. Surgeons are pretty good at surgery. Is it the graft type? Maybe. Some grafts are better than others. The most extreme example here is that of an allograft, which is a graft from a cadaver's body. Allografts are 5.5 times more likely to fail than an autograft, which is a graft from a different part of your own body. But athletes aren't getting allografts in 2025, so I don't think this plays a big role today. Is it their age? Younger athletes are more at risk for graft failure. The odds of re-injury decrease 0.09 for every year increase in age, but that's not helpful. You're not going to change your age, so let's focus on things we can control. Is it the time of their return? Now we're on to something. This is heavily supported by literature. Stay tuned for more. Is it their poor function and lousy return to sport training? Bingo! This is undoubtedly one of the most likely culprits. Let's dive in. Our question at hand is, when are you ready to return to your sport? When are you cleared? But what exactly should cleared even mean? Being cleared should be nuanced, not binary. Being cleared isn't a toggle switch, it's a dimmer. We don't, or at least we shouldn't, toggle the switch up from being not cleared to being cleared for everything. Instead, we spin the dimmer to gradually be cleared for more activities. Different sports, positions, and drills have different demands. Some of them are riskier than others. You can be cleared to swing a golf club well before you're cleared to play in a live football game. When it comes to being cleared, what matters more, father time or mother function? The graft takes somewhere around 2 years to complete ligamentization. That means whatever they put in your knee, which is usually a piece of patellar tendon, quadriceps, or hamstring, it takes about 2 years for it to transform into a ligament. Does that mean you should wait 2 years to return playing to ensure you have a more ligament-like ligament in there? Not really. That's just not practical. You have a shelf life of roughly 10 years to have a meaningful competitive athletic career. Taking a full 2 years off has diminishing returns on investment. We have pretty solid evidence to support that for every month that an athlete returns to their sport before 9 months, they are 50% more likely to re-tear. So, if they return at 8 months, they're 50% more likely to re-tear. At 7 months, they're 100% more likely to re-tear. At 6 months, they're 150% more likely to re-tear, and so on. After 9 months, time alone seems to stop being predictive of re-injury. That's where function swoops in. You need to let biology run its course, but you also need to get as strong and powerful as possible to protect the graft. The answer isn't time or function, it's time and function. If you're crushing return to performance tests at 6 months, you're still going to be at an increased risk of re-injury as opposed to if you waited until 9 months. If you're at 11 months, but you're still weak, slow, and hesitant, you're still going to be at an increased risk of re-injury. When it comes to function, we must be relatively absolute. Most return to sport tests compare your surgical leg to your other leg. This is called the limb symmetry index, or LSI. If you kick 100 pounds on your healthy leg and 60 pounds on your surgical leg, your LSI for that test is 60%. Research has suggested that the threshold of good enough is usually between 85 and 95%. If your surgical leg does 90% as good as your other leg, then that's good enough to return. Does that make sense though? Let's consider little Johnny, who tore his left ACL 6 months ago. Fortunately, we have a lot of information on little Johnny. Before he got hurt, Johnny's quad strength was 75 pounds on both legs, and his single leg hop distance was 50 inches on both sides. His physical therapist focused really hard on getting his left leg, which is his surgical leg, as strong as possible. Johnny always did his home exercises and worked his tail off at therapy. At 6 months, his physical therapist tested him, and his left leg was 90% as strong and powerful as his right leg. Woohoo! Let's go! He kicked 60 pounds on his right leg and 54 pounds on his left leg. He jumped 48 inches on his right leg and 43 inches on his left leg. Wait a second. His numbers before his injury were 75 pounds on both legs. Now he's kicking 60 pounds on his right and 54 pounds on his left? He was jumping 50 inches on both legs before the injury. Now he's jumping 48 inches on his right and 43 inches on his left? That's not good. His numbers before his injury were clearly not good enough because that's where he was when he got hurt. Then he took 6 months off and did no targeted training on his right leg, which is his non-surgical leg. Logically, that leg got weaker. So now we're using that leg, which is even weaker than at the time of the injury, as the standard of return? Actually, we're using 90% of the weaker leg as the standard? 90% of suck is crap. Context is important. You need to be strong in an absolute sense and strong relative to the other leg. You need to aim to be stronger than you were pre-injury before returning, not as strong as you were. You should be training the heck out of that non-surgical leg throughout the entire process. You should be chasing a moving goalpost. Aiming for limb symmetry is important, but only in the context of the non-surgical leg continuing to get stronger and more powerful. Okay, absolute and relative strength matters. But what should be strong? It's the quads. It's the quads until it's not the quads. They're the linchpin item that has to be pulled first. We have to measure quad strength. Furthermore, we have to measure it in isolation. A lot of clinicians will use compound movements, like a leg press, to test strength. Compound movements use multiple joints and multiple muscles. Athletes are good compensators. If your quad isn't strong enough, you'll still test well and get the weight up by calling in reinforcements from the other joints and the other muscles, like using the hip extensors more during a leg press. Isolating leg extension gives you no opportunity to use anything besides the quads. You can't cheat it. We use a crane scale kick test. With the knee joint right at the edge of the table, the strap is lengthened to allow the athlete to kick out to 60 degrees. Over a period of 10 seconds, the athlete gradually works up to kicking 100%. We usually do 2 warm-up trials where we work up to 70%, then 90% over 10-second periods. The athlete is allowed to lean back as desired. Our goal is to get you to at least 90% LSI, with the context of LSI given above in mind. It's important to note that the compound strength movements are also really important. They just can't completely supplant isolated testing. You want to get your reverse lunges and trap bar deadlifts stupid strong throughout the rehab process, but you also need to isolate and test the quad. But strength alone isn't enough. You have to use that strength quickly. You have to develop power. To measure power, hops were introduced in the 1980s as a standard for ACL rehab, and they've remained a mainstay ever since. Hops involve jumping on one leg and landing on that same leg. They're a good proxy for your capability to safely change direction because they require you to produce a lot of force concentrically, then control the landing eccentrically. We use a combination of horizontal and vertical leaps as well as a combination of single and repeat hops. So you have single hop for distance, triple hop for distance, single leg vertical jump, single leg 4 jump test. Again, our goal is to get to at least 90% LSI with the context of LSI given above in mind. So let's move on to agility. ACL injuries are nearly synonymous with cutting, pivoting, and twisting. So you better make sure that you are ready to cut, pivot, and twist without issue. Furthermore, there's growing evidence to support that these re-tears are exacerbated by cognitive load. Huh? That means that the cutting motion alone isn't normally the issue. It's cutting while the brain is focused on something else. This could be tracking a ball, mirroring a person, or looking down at the field to see what's going on. To test agility, we use a reactive 10-10 shuttle. The athlete has to sprint 10 yards toward the therapist or coach. Right before the athlete gets to the 10-yard mark, the therapist points out right or left. The athlete has to turn over that shoulder and then sprint back through the starting line. This is timed on laser timers. This is usually our final hurdle of objective testing. I'm not even going to test a timed reactive 10-10 shuttle until strength and power testing is cleared. The risk to reward ratio just isn't favorable. Again, our goal is to get to at least 90% LSI with the context of LSI given above in mind. All that physical stuff doesn't matter if you don't have confidence, though. One of the most surefire ways to get hurt in any sport is to go out there scared or confused. We need to make sure that you are both physically and psychologically ready to return. I like to use the ACL RSI survey to gauge how you're feeling internally about your own ability to return. The ACL RSI is a 12-question survey. Are you confident that you can perform at your previous level of sport participation? Do you think that you are likely to re-injure your knee by participating in your sport? Are you nervous about playing your sport? Are you confident that your knee will not give way by playing your sport? Are you confident that you could play your sport without concern for your knee? Do you find it frustrating to have to consider your knee with respect to your sport? Are you fearful of re-injuring your knee by playing your sport? Are you confident about your knee holding up under pressure? Are you afraid of accidentally injuring your knee by playing your sport? Do thoughts of having to go through surgery and rehabilitation prevent you from playing your sport? Are you confident about your ability to perform well at your sport? Do you feel relaxed about playing your sport? The athlete answers on a scale of 0 to 10 for each question, where 0 indicates not being ready and 10 indicates very ready. The total score goes up to 120, with 65 being a rough threshold suggesting readiness. Now, I hate to break it to you, but there will always be a chance that you re-tear your ACL. The only way to guarantee that you don't is to sit on the couch and binge Netflix for every second for the rest of your life. Participating in a sport puts you at risk of having an ACL injury. The more cutting, pivoting, and twisting involved in that sport, the greater risk you have. Our goal isn't to clear you when you are not at any risk whatsoever, but to clear you when you've reached the risk tolerance threshold that you are comfortable with. Context is going to play a big role here, but doesn't it always? A professional athlete who has to participate in training camp in August, or they won't have any chance of making the team, should tolerate more risk than a 14-year-old athlete who has a spring 7-on-7 league starting up. It actually makes sense for the professional athlete to try to come back at 6 months if that's when training camp starts up, and if he doesn't make the team at this particular instance in his life, he probably won't ever have a chance to do it again. It would make no sense for the 14-year-old athlete to think twice about playing 7-on-7 that spring. He's going to have plenty more opportunities to play a sport in the future, and the overall importance of that particular league in his entire life is relatively insignificant. Black and white answers rarely exist. Get comfortable in the gray. So let's run that all back. The only thing that sucks worse than tearing your ACL is tearing your ACL twice. To reduce your risk of falling into the 2 times ACL club, you should be intentional about your clearance. Being cleared isn't a binary moment, it's a continuum. Different sports and activities have different risk odds. You should be cleared for these gradually. Some important factors to being cleared include both time and function tell us when you're ready to return. Neither alone is sufficient. Limb symmetry index is important, but only if your non-surgical leg is getting stronger too. It's the quad until it's not the quad. You have to test isolated quad strength. There's no way around it. Different hops give us important information about if your body is prepared to handle high loads at fast speeds. ACLs normally tear during agility movements, so you need to test agility. Psychology matters. If you don't think you're ready, even if all of your physical numbers are great, then you're more likely to get injured. And finally, our goal isn't to clear you when you are not at any risk whatsoever, but to clear you when you've reached the risk tolerance threshold that you are comfortable with. Not all situations are the same. Some people should be willing to tolerate more risk than others. And I want to leave you with a quick thought on the gray. Our brain likes clear-cut answers. It gets uncomfortable with too many choices and too many possibilities. It distorts our reality and makes it seem like there are clear right and wrong solutions. Just look at how people behave in political endeavors. The truth is, though, the world is gray. There's nuance everywhere. Certainty does not exist. The more comfortable you get with that, the more likely you will be able to accomplish things that others can't, because you'll see the world in a way that others won't. Embrace uncertainty if you ever want to achieve greatness. And until next time, continue to be great and go
straight
Zips.
A student, but I'm friends with a cool kid. Following the rules and the rubric. Freestyle on the bus.